everything was good. Everything was good so far for my family. So that gives us further assurance to stay in Mildura.
Great, thank you, Zia. I think you've painted a really nice picture of your first impressions when you first arrived, and just how much you've grown since that time, but also maybe how you really built that sense of belonging and connection to your community. So hopefully we can hear a little bit more about that throughout this discussion. Sorgul, let's move to you. You're originally from northern Syria, and you've been living in Toowoomba in Queensland for about 3 years now. Yep. So you're still a relative newcomer. You're a very active community member. You're a uni student. You work as an interpreter. You're doing lots of volunteer work, including mentoring young Yazidis that are living in Toowoomba. So I'm interested to hear from you. What are some of the things that have helped you and your community to settle in Toowoomba?
Now, first thing first, I want to tell a little bit about my community, because not many people. What I'm gonna say, what I'm gonna talk about in terms of settlement in Toowoomba is from the perspective of my community, what worked well for my community and myself. And that doesn't make Toowoomba or the settlement process in Toowoomba a perfect one, but at least what worked for us and has been working for us so far. Now, the things that have worked, there are very good reasons that make Toowoomba. There are very good reasons that make Toowoomba a good place for settlement. And I'm going, as I said, to talk from my personal experience and the experience of my community. The first thing that is really important to me and my community is having a community. There is a sense of community, in my opinion, in small cities like Toowoomba, where there are many different groups, but they all work together and they support each other. I want to talk about something that happened last week in specific, which was very interesting for me to see, because for me that was not new, but something really important and made me feel that I'm a part of this large community or the large family in Toowoomba. So there was an event that brought people from different faith groups and almost people from different communities in together for remembering the people who lost a beloved one of COVID, and also it was to pay respect to healthcare workers. I felt like we all represented one family, as I said, and it's really important for a community like mine, refugee communities in general, to feel belonged, which also helps, in my opinion, in integration. Adding to that, there is another very important point about Toowoomba is that it's a church-based city where there is a lot of support provided to refugees by churches. Now, the support varies from teaching English classes, making friends with refugees, refugee communities, or sometimes simply getting together and give them that feeling that they are welcomed and embraced. Support groups, we have many support groups and charities in Toowoomba that are supporting the Yazidi community. And such as, some of these supporting groups and charities are such as You Belong, that provides different supporting programs, such as English classes, matching family program, home visits, podcasts to share their stories. And I'm co-hosting that podcast. I've heard that they are recently preparing for a project to empower refugee women. And I think many Yazidi women would be able to access that program. It is to get their driving license and get independent. There are other groups such as form filling clinics, because to Yazidi people, it is really important for them to be united with their families in order for them to move on in their lives. Other important things such as work opportunities for farmers. Now, the majority of my community, especially the Iraqi Yazidis, being farmers, it has been great for them to be able to work in a field they are familiar with and they have previous experience. And because it doesn't necessarily require English proficiency. In my opinion, Toowoomba is relatively a conservative and safe place, I think, for refugee women and families to live. And usually wherever in Toowoomba you go, you would see somebody you know. And it's not the case, I think, for the big cities, such as Brisbane, where you go there and you might not meet a person you know. One very important thing about Toowoomba, and that has helped with the settlement process, is having enough interpreters. And I'm one of the interpreters that have been in the community over the past 3 years. At least in the past 2 years, we have had enough, or I'd say the largest number of interpreters providing services in different fields for the Kurdish-speaking community. Now, of course, adding to that, all the settlement programs, service providers, and other projects and programs that are funded by the government to support the settlement process for refugees, where I guess it's everywhere in Toowoomba. I think I've forgot to mention that we have a very large number of families in Toowoomba since 2017, and until now, 1,300 Yazidi families settled in Toowoomba. And there has been a constant need of support and help and the things they are receiving. And that doesn't apply to all families due to the large number. Of course, each group and each settlement program has its capacity to support.
Thanks, Sorgul. That's a really great overview, and it certainly sounds like you've arrived into a very active and welcoming community where there are lots of opportunities through different groups and different community-led activities to make those connections with locals, which I'm sure, and it sounds like has really helped you in that process.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm going to move to Mayor Erika Vickery now. Erika, you're the Mayor of Naracoorte-Lucindale Council in South Australia, and Naracoorte has a population of 5,500, my research tells me, please correct me if I'm wrong, and it also includes migrants that come from all around the world, but in particular former refugees from Afghanistan, a growing population. So I'm really interested to hear from you about your community's journey supporting refugees and what the role of council has been through that process.
Oh, thank you very much. And yes, you're quite right. We're a small country town or rural town, a service town to our primary industries around the district. And amazingly enough, over the last nearly 15 years, we now have a 20% multicultural community, not just the Afghan Hazara people, but nearly every country in the nations international are here. And I would just sort of sum up, I guess, successful settlement of refugees in this area has really been built on building of relationships between the community and our multicultural people. So Naracoorte is not a town that the government uses as a settlement town, and migrants have come here because work is available, mainly to support our major industry of primary production, and the work is mainly available in the beef processing plant, Tees Australia abattoir, and also in the vineyards that are surrounding Naracoorte, and you heard about that a little bit earlier today. The first group of Hazara refugees that came to Naracoorte were all men, and there were quite a lot of them that came at once. I think at one stage there were 400 men, single men in Naracoorte, and the spectrum of belonging really sort of hit home to me earlier. That was spoken about that they started off, the community started off as being fearful, then tolerant, and now have become welcoming. And so it has been a journey for the community, but it's been a very successful journey. Over time, of course, it's wonderful to see that a lot of the men have actually brought their families. We have families here now settled, which is helping to settle them, and they have stayed here. So I guess at the moment, from our Hazara people, there's probably about 300 of them in Naracoorte. Some of the things that have made it possible to move from being fearful to being welcoming has been part of the role of leadership, and that's where I think council and myself as mayor has really played a part in that. When the first lot of people came, they were doing different things than our community was used to, really simple things, but they were not our community wasn't understanding it. So we had, you know, a lot of single men meeting in the town square, and they were sort of a bit suspicious of that. I met with the leaders of the Hazara people, and we talked about the things and expectations of our community and their expectations. And through that communication, there was an understanding of what we were expecting and what they were expecting. And slowly over time, relationships and friendships built. So council's main roles, I think, are leadership role, and also advocacy role for making sure that we have the health and the settlement services in our town to help people settle. And we've been very fortunate that we've had the Australian Migrant Resource Centre based in Naracoorte, who have really helped with sets and humanitarian settlement. Then we have our clubs, Rotary clubs have already been mentioned as being great ambassadors for assisting migrant people, and they have taken migrant people under their wing, and they have become members of that, the Rotary Club, and part of the community as far as welcoming the multicultural people. Council has also instigated a lot of quite a few events, and everyone's well aware of Harmony Day, and that slowly over time has really built up to a lot of people attending those events. Australia Day is an important celebration where all of our community gets together, as is Anzac Day, and our multicultural community has been very much involved in that. And over the last 3 years, we've had a multicultural soccer carnival, which attracts people from right across our Limestone Coast region to attend. And the wonderful part about all of those events is it's all of our community getting together. So it's not just one group of people. And then it's built from that the Hazaras often have now quite big celebrations to celebrate engagements, birth of children, and they invite a lot of people from the general community to attend. So the relationships have been building and building, and I think this is what's making it very successful. So I guess we're so pleased that we have that diversity of people in our community, and I think it is really based on friendships and kindness. And just one other thing that I'd really like to just mention is a community group called the Circle of Volunteers, and it's a group of retired women who have gathered the migrant women together to help with English language, because one of the most important things is language, and to get to be able to converse with each other. And not only do they have weekly sessions with the women just for conversation conversation, have outings as well. So they go out to our World Heritage caves, they go to the wetlands and those beautiful places that Sarah was talking about earlier. And then there's also a group of volunteers who help the men in the library once a week with their conversational English, as well as the formal English classes that are here. So we're slowly getting there, and I think that the migrant community has just added so much to our Naracoorte community.
Thank you, Erika. And that's just a fascinating perspective that you bring, being able to follow the journey from the very beginnings to where you are now, which is really building that strong sense of broad community trust and friendship across everyone in the communities. So you know, I'd love to hopefully hear a little bit more about that throughout the discussion. Alison, we'll go to you now. And I guess talking about communities that are in the fairly early stages of the process of thinking about attracting refugees and trying to build that kind of community support at a local level. We'd very much love to hear your perspective. You live in the beautiful Huon Valley, which is about 45 minutes outside of Hobart in Tasmania. And you recently set up a team of local volunteers that are keen to support as part of the Community Refugee SIP initiative. And I know you've had a lot of volunteer experience locally and in Hobart as well. So I'm really interested to hear from you, if you can let us know how you became involved with supporting refugees, and what has the response of the broader community in Huon Valley been around this idea to try and welcome and settle former refugees in your town?
Okay, thank you, Talia. Well, my personal involvement with refugees, I guess, has only been over the last probably 5 to 6 years. I still volunteer with the Red Cross in the Pathways to Protection program in schools, which is run across Australia but relatively recent in Tasmania. And as part of that, we take people with lived experience with us, and this is to dispel the myths and bad publicity, I guess, that refugees and people seeking asylum have. And it's great to talk with kids, and the lived experience people are just wonderful in sharing their stories, which makes a huge impact on children. I've also been volunteering as a volunteer in the Humanitarian Settlement program, and that is with the Migrant Resource Centre in Hobart. And I guess I want to give a shout out to Rural Australians for Refugees. We have a very active group here in southern Tasmania, and which is how we then heard about what is now CRESA, the Community Refugee Sponsorship Australia. So we decided, because there are a number of people in the community who, with their advocates and their, sign petitions and do all the things in support of refugees, but actually want to do something. And so we put together the group under the mentorship of CRESA, and we've been working with them since their inception. It's been the best thing for members of the group, certainly, who haven't got a lot of experience, but a lot of very good will. We've used the CRESA training, and also we've organised training from the Migrant Resource Centre in trauma awareness and cultural awareness, obviously, before that. The group itself is enormously enthusiastic, and we have a range of skills in that group of, ex-English teachers, people who are currently, assisting with English. We've got some great fundraisers, and we've done a lot of fundraising. Now, the good thing about that, I think, is that our fundraising activities have been a great precursor in education for the community, so that we're overtly raising funds for refugees and potentially people who might come and live in our community, and for a couple of guys that live in our community who we've been supporting. At the moment, we've mainly attracted people on temporary visas, so safe haven visas. That's presented problems for us, and much greater problems for them because of their lack of permanency. However, one of them is building up an amazing business, which is now really getting traction, and he's starting to employ people. So we're assisting him with building that business, and it's been great today to hear a number of the speakers talking about building business, because I actually think even though where we are is a great fruit growing area, the Huon Valley, and of course we get a lot of seasonal workers, but there is huge opportunity for small business to be created. So I must say I've been gleaning a lot of ideas today from the speakers to assist with that. Sometimes I think, and I don't think this is peculiar to the Huon Valley, but employment as such, so, you know, what I grew up with is employment, you know, the 9 to 5 fully, you know, full-time work, I think is probably decreasing in a lot of places. There's a lot of opportunity for small business. And so I do think, well, particularly in our area, I should speak only about that, but I do think that's going to be somewhere where we can assist a lot. We've got tremendous goodwill for low-cost rental, which is terrific, because of course that's the other thing, and certainly since COVID, many mainlanders are moving to Tasmania, taking up, you know, pushing up house prices and rental prices and so on. But we have managed to garner a number of local community who are really wanting to assist with the refugee issues. So I guess we have a huge amount of enthusiasm. We do have a couple of men who are refugees live in our local community. The other thing you know, that I have been musing about all day, Tasmania, you know, it's a blessing and a curse that we are an island and often dropped off the Australian map. But, you know, the whole of Tasmania is only 500,000 people, or just over. Hobart is a very small town. It's only just over 200,000, and it's, you know, plus or minus an hour from here. But all the services are in Hobart. And so that can be a bit of a hindrance for people. All the kind of more mainstream government services are in Hobart. And so this is something we have to work with, I think. But I'm happy to talk more about that and, you know, other things as the discussion goes on.
Thanks, Alison, for those insights. And I think it's a really interesting point you raise, because of course when we talk about regional settlement, there are larger regional centres that have established settlement organisations that are funded by the government and access to more resources and supports. But then there are smaller communities, and I guess as Erika was mentioning, where there's a need to potentially advocate for those services and supports, but also a greater need to draw upon what's existing in terms of volunteers and other services and look at capacity building. So I think it is a very important point to raise. And it probably takes us very nicely to our next speaker, Kwame, who is based in Darwin. So, you know, it's considered a regional centre, and it does have some federal government, at least, investment in terms of settlement services. But when you compare Darwin to some of the larger cities like Sydney and Melbourne, where there's a lot of services and supports in place, there's obviously not the same level of existing infrastructure in terms of government funded. So Kwame, you're the CEO of Melaleuca Australia, which is an organisation in Darwin, a settlement service in Darwin that provides support to refugees. And I'm really interested to hear from you about your experience of refugee settlement there, and what you think some of the fundamental services and supports are that need to be considered for refugees that are settling in those areas that don't have that same level of resources as the major capital cities.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
I can, thank you. You're good.
All right. So I'm speaking to you from Naracoorte country here in Darwin, and to pay my respects to the elders for the opportunity to address you from their land. So in the Northern Territory, we are the only humanitarian settlement provider. We're based in Darwin. However, we have a rather unique organization in the sense that we are also one of Australia's 8 the torture and trauma specialist providers. So we are connected with the FAST network. We're also the refugee health coordinator for the Northern Territory and have the SETS program as part of our suite of services. So on one hand, what that does is it gives us a really beautiful single point of access that is really quite well wrapped around for the people we support. We are quite fortunate in the sense that even though Darwin is a city and then also a regional area, it is really very culturally diverse. And so what you experience in Darwin is a lot of access to communities that are quite rich. What we are, that's rich in diversity. What we do see is the patterns of resettlement do change quite a bit. So a few years ago, we had when Australia signed the settlement of 12,000 Syrians, the Northern Territory had a portion of that, which is about 300 people that were settling in the Northern Territory. But because of the fact that the Northern Territory is not as densely populated, and it's not they don't have the city infrastructure as the other bigger cities do, we then tend to see a really quick exit. And so in that year, I think we settled just over 200 people, and we had close to 200 people exit. So it does put a fair amount of pressure on a small organization that is doing a range of services. The beautiful side to that is we have a really strong focus on relationships, which it was really good to hear my previous colleague speakers refer to that as well, that the relationships do make quite a big difference. And one of the things that we have in the Northern Territory as a settlement provider is the Migrant Settlement Services Network, which brings together over 20 organizations, government departments, NGOs, and we have the luxury of being able to sit with everybody in the one room and have a conversation, whether it's a settlement provider, whether it's the adult migrant English provider, or the clinicians, or even housing providers. We're able to have a conversation with everybody in the one room, and we're able to address certain issues. What that means then is that as we're settling cohorts, one of the patterns we see is when people are coming into Australia, they usually will identify a link and they go to where their link is. Where they don't identify a link, generally they have opportunity to settle in the Northern Territory. So that means for us that we are often welcoming people who are new and they're emerging communities where the community leaders themselves are quite new in their role. And so oftentimes our work is building the capacity, not only of community leaders, but also a range of other services that are essential to resettlement. So from time to time, we, as the refugee health coordinator for the Northern Territory, we're working with doctors, we're working with the Center for Disease Control, the hospitals, depending on the particular cohort that is settling, to build their capacity about that cohort. And then we're doing very similar for, even the adult migrant English providers. We have that really ongoing discussions with them. One of the success points for us is being able to work to a way of flipping the system. So rather than working with communities to be able to welcome humanitarian entrance, what we're doing is saying, let's find a way so that the community leaders and the communities themselves showcase their richness, so that the general community is able to draw closer. And so some of the work we've been doing is going to places like schools, working in workplaces, looking at ways to create opportunities for employment. And we set up some really interesting initiatives. One of them is an initiative that we call the Portable Panel. And what the Portable Panel does is it brings together people with lived experience, people who have worked in the sector, and other and trauma counselors in various slices of settlement. And we open that up to the general community, and anyone can invite a portable panel, and we can either go to the school, we can go to hospitals, we can go to workplaces, and we set up as a panel. And questions get asked, and we're able to answer those questions directly. So we're continuing as an organization to find ways that bring the communities closer to us, or we go closer to the communities, and that we are constantly shifting attitudes and constantly creating opportunities for that gap to close. That's pretty much what I can tell you. I think I might just leave it out open to questions. We do have quite a range of things that we do as an organization. And the most recent one that I wanted to touch on is that we recently launched a space here in our organization where communities can actually come and take leadership in, for example, if someone wants to set up a restaurant, we have a licensed kitchen, so they're able to come use the kitchen, use the space until such a time that they create enough followers, and then they're able to go, okay, I'm now going to go and set up my own business. We got some funding to purchase some food vans, and so over the next 6 to 12 months, we're starting to release those food vans into the communities. So our work is truly always about finding a way to partner now with the voice of the people in the communities to go, what are the gaps that you're experiencing, and how can we as an organization partner with you to close that gap for you, rather than us saying we think this is what you need.
Some really fascinating examples, and I love the idea of a portable panel. I'm sure that's something that could work really well in lots of different communities. So thank you for sharing that. I'd like to go back to Zia, because you've made me think, Kwame, there's been a lot of discussion about how to support new and emerging community groups when you've got sort of the first families arriving in a community, and whether that be drawing upon the community goodwill to help to welcome people, or actually kind of working to build that understanding and trust at a local level. And you've lived that, Zia. You were the 5th family in Mildura. So I'm interested to hear from you, if you were to go back in time, or if you're helping to plan the arrival of the next group of families into Mildura, what would you do differently? Do you have any insights from that experience that you would recommend to communities that are starting out in this?
Thank you, Talia. I believe, being realistic, can't travel through the time. But one thing is that they have this principle that my dad told me, is that whenever you catch the fish from water, it's fresh. It's not too late to bring changes and amendments. And Mildura is a beautiful community, like we say, more than 120 different cultures residing in harmonious aspects of life. And life, in terms of being uneasy, is not too difficult to live that. One of the biggest challenging that I only can talk about, from the Hazara community and being recently elected as the president of the community, some of the challenges that my community face. Now, we got 3 cohorts of the community that categorizes again into 2 subcategories. So we have migrants, especially those who come as a migrant or a partner visa, like people actually sponsoring their partners or family members coming as a migrant. Not necessarily they have the same sort of support accesses from the migrant resource centers like AIMS Australia or Sanrisha Malay Ethnic Communities Council or Mildura City Council. They don't have much access from the local services compared to the refugees. So then we have refugee communities like those who come from the humanitarian visas, integrating it. AIMS is sending reflux of refugees into regional areas like Mildura. Then we also have cohorts of asylum seekers on bridging visas, chef visas, or temporary protection visas. So 3 cohorts are have different challenges around them. And as a collective, one of the biggest one actually at the moment, which is my agenda to support the community, is finding a community center to cover that. And one of the biggest one is, if people will ask us, then what about our children? When they grow up, can they actually speak Darwin language or Hazaragi? Where are we actually going to send to? Who is the religious leader or the mentor that actually can do that? And where are we going to do it? Like we go to, say, Sanrisha Malay Ethnic Communities Council or Mildura City Council or agencies, if we hire the, like a hall or a community center, it's actually going to be huge costly. Who is going to fund that? Who's going to, support that for those language classes? Women gathering together to say, okay, after Ramadan or during celebration, we want to have a women's business together. We want to celebrate. We want to have embroideries, or we want to draw something or do some activities as a woman. Where are we gonna have it? And I can't answer that at the moment, unfortunately. No, men gathering together to say, okay, constantly work. Then what is my social gathering? Where am I actually go and socialize? I mean, we book some volleyball or soccer tournaments or other things, but how long we continue that? What about others that are actually not into this and not having interest in that? And we had like for single men coming, but their children and partners are still in overseas. Social gatherings for them. We had refugee kitchen and garden program, teaching them how to do proper cooking, change that patriarchal norm that men are okay to cook and not really rely on junk food like KFC and McDonald's all the time, and having that healthy lifestyle. So there are the type of activities that we did. But when we talk about community center, it's beyond that. It's like a prayers area. It is a cultural hub. It is a social hub. It is like a sporting hub. People could do the religious and cultural practices, New Year celebration, Eid celebration, after Ramadan celebration, you name it. Women's one as well. And then a lot of communities and they want to donate a car, like how to learn to drive to the community, especially the men and women who are actually arrived and they both don't have a license, and they need to be empowered that way to do that. So the biggest one, if I have to go back through the time with this family, we gathered to say, okay, let's chip in $100 in 2007 and then 2021, that's 14 years. We're gonna have about, say, $100,000. Currently, I'm sitting with $60,000 of the community budget in my account, or a community's account. But we wanted to purchase a land which was supposed to be about 80,000. But after this COVID hit and housing prices went off the roof, I'm looking at a small, used to be 1 acre or 1,000 square meter was about 80,000, but now I can find it for 200,000. So community center is really, really important for my community.
I wonder, Sorgul, would you like to add to that at all? And particularly thinking of reflecting on the experiences of Yazidi women and what their experiences have been in Toowoomba, maybe compared with some of the bigger cities.
I think one of the challenges, I do agree with Zia, it would be really important to have such community centers or cultural centers. And I recently have been trying to talk about and try and get somebody to be interested in a project that I'm been thinking of, which is men's and women's shed. Would be really important to try and bring what could be women, multicultural men's and women's shed could be separately or together. It's really important to try and bring purpose and value back to their lives. It's not easy to find something to do when, especially for the AZD people, they've been through a lot, and it has been challenging for them specifically to try and sort of integrate in a Western culture, a totally Western system. And I think that has been a challenge. Now, for women especially, many of them feel isolated because they don't have much to do in terms of education. I've been also talking about this recently, that the adult migrant English program should really be there to support them. And teaching English as a second language does not work with people, and women especially, who have never got a chance to go to school and learn literacy. So it shouldn't be that way. It should be teaching them English as their first language. I'm talking from my experience in learning languages. And yeah, the other things that I think would be really important is to address the domestic and family violence. Over the past 3 years, I've only heard and attended one presentation and a workshop. One of them I was the interpreter, and the other workshop, it was a very small group of women, and they were talking about domestic violence. So it would be really important to address this issue to help women know their rights and also their responsibilities. I remember during that workshop, I talked about the importance of language, or make the support services available and make them very simple in terms of the language, so they know what they can do in case they have been through that situation. As I mentioned before, the isolation, they don't get to go out and meet new people unless somebody goes and talks to them. Trauma has been a very big part of the isolation itself. So, because in Toowoomba we have QPAS, but unfortunately we have a very long waiting list, and this issue should be addressed immediately after they arrive, because I would think I couldn't be doing anything if I have any of the mental issues that would not let me think of moving on and finding a purpose in my life. That is very important, especially for Middle Eastern women. Because I think men would just go and find friends and do something, but women stay with children, and that impacts not only themselves, but also the children as well. Yeah, this is what I think has been the challenges and how to address them.
Mayor Erika, I've seen you nodding away. I wonder if you have any thoughts you'd like to add to this discussion. And you're on mute, sorry.
Sorry about that. I was just really interested to hear your perspective, Sorgul, because I know that the migrant women in Naracoorte have also found challenges with the language and getting out and about. And it's been wonderful. I did mention our circle of volunteers who not only meet weekly with some of the women, and it is so interesting that they all come from different perspectives. Some have never been to school in their own country, let alone going to school or trying to learn formal language, lessons. So it's now wonderful to see so many of them with their driver's license and driving. Their children are at school. Many of them have families. The school support is just wonderful. Quite a few of our women are now working and have found themselves some work, either as interpreters at the school helping with the children, or working cleaners in one of our motels, working at a childcare centre, And it's just lovely to see the liberation this gives these people when they get out and about. And just recently, we had a meeting at Border Town with all the Hazara people who met with Home Affairs, really to do with the tragedy in Afghanistan. And there were women there from Naracoorte in attendance, as well as the men, and there were over 100 people at that meeting. And a couple of the women actually stood up and talked in front of everybody and expressed their concerns and had their say. And it was just so liberating to see how they have come from where they first started, where they could hardly look you in the eye because they were so shy, now to see you down the street, give you a big hug when we're allowed to, and speak to you, with you, even if it's only about the weather, but to be really starting to feel as though they're part of the community. And it's really our local champions who do that, and our community that is, really engaging with them and making them so feel welcome. So they say it takes a whole village to bring up a child. Well, it's also exactly the same for bringing up our communities, regardless of where they come from.
Thank you for that perspective. We've got a few minutes left, unfortunately, only a few minutes left. So I'll throw to you, Kwame. I can see you've got your hand up. And then Alison, if you'd like to add anything before we finish up, that would be great. So a couple of minutes, please, Kwame.
Yeah,
Thanks.
no problem. I really just want to acknowledge that all those messages that came through are really we're seen as well. So the issues of isolation, and they're often supported by a place to gather, and some of the opportunities that we're always presenting to our communities is that there are opportunities to gather where we work. There are opportunities to gather where we're able to connect with other community groups to offer places for them to be able to use those spaces. I think that at the moment we're settling a particular cohort where illiteracy is an issue, and so while the system is about teaching them to understand English and to read and write English, where they are at is very different. They are looking for opportunities just to connect with each other, to experience conversational English, so that they're able to learn through those conversations rather than perhaps being in the classroom to learn. The other issue that we're seeing is, and there are quite two extremes. So issues around children being born for the first time, where they are the first, the parents for the first time in a new community, and how to be able to provide support within a community setting to their children. And I know Zia talked a bit about that. And then the other part is end of life, where we're seeing people who arrive in the aging communities for the first time, and they're having concerns about what's going to happen to us. How do we, how would our lives come to an end, and how would we have those cultural, send-offs that are, what we are required to have in our cultures. And so the need to be able to bring people together to have those conversations and find solutions to those are quite, topical for us.
Thanks, Kwame. And Alison.
Just really quickly, one of the things, I think one of the teachings of CRESA, and I'm sure this happens in many other places, but because this has been quite a well-mentored program, is the need for really looking at the individual need, because I think we've talked very much in generalizations or particular cultures and so on, but the needs are so different between individuals. So, the need for community, actually, for one of the Iranian fellows we're supporting here, is probably minimal in terms of needing lots of community support, but he needs a lot of individual support in terms of, getting his business going, perhaps taking him up the mountains or whatever. So I think it's really important when we're talking about this issue that we really look as much as possible with individuals, and that's where I guess volunteers are probably best suited, because they have time or have decided to make time. And I do think individuals within cultures can be quite different. I'm sure I'm just only saying something that everybody knows, but I want to make sure that we don't just go, well, all the Hazara people need this, or all the all the Syrian people need that. It is so different. And our biggest problem has been the right religious institution for people to attend. So, for the Orthodox Christian community. So there are so many different needs, and I think we need to be really clear, particularly in our group and in our area, that we look after individual needs as much as we possibly can. Yeah.
And I think we couldn't have ended on a more eloquent note. Thank you for that, Alison, reminding ourselves that we are talking about individuals who have different hopes and aspirations, and the strength of the work that you're doing, and remembering that and placing that at the front of our minds, I think, is so important. So yes, unfortunately that brings us to the end of our hour of power. I'd like to thank you all for listening to this fascinating discussion. I've really enjoyed listening to each of our panelists, and would like to extend a really warm and thank you and my gratitude to Sorgul, to Zia, Kwame, Alison and Mayor Erika for joining us today. And I'm sure everyone online is giving you a big virtual round of applause at the moment. Thank you. And I'll throw back to you now, Margaret.
Yeah, and thank you to Talia. And I agree, that was a really lovely place to finish, Alison, and a very important reminder to all of us. I must admit, Zia, that I was also giggling a little when I was listening to you talking about the need for a community centre, because I can remember being with some South Sudanese in Sydney a while ago, and they kept saying to me, but all we need is a joint. And I tried to say to them that I understood exactly what it was, but this was possibly not the best way to articulate it to authorities. And that I suspect that you did it in a far more, in a way that is far more understandable. And that also leads me to a comment that was in the chat from Orange City Council, where they make available to community groups the community facilities on a regular basis. And this then brings us into the importance of the welcoming community and the role that local government can play in giving the emerging communities the capacity to have a place to gather, to learn their language, celebrate their culture, sit and chat. It's to give them their much needed joint, the place that they feel safe and can connect. What a wonderful session. Thank you, Talia, for pulling it together. Thank you to all of the speakers in that session. Just before I go to introduce our final speaker of today, I just want to let you know that Alison Larkin's 12 domains of settlement will be popped into the chat. So please, if those people who wanted to double check their notes, go into the chat during the final session, and that they will be there. One other thing just to flag as well, lest I forget the end, the reference was made in the chat during the day to the Department of Home Affairs consultations around the settlement program, the size and composition of the settlement program. If this is something that interests you, please go onto the DHA website and have a look for how to submit to that. And I'd like to think that maybe some of the people here today could be feeding into that process some really fantastic ideas about how to effectively achieve the regional settlement aspirations they have. But now to our final speaker, who has, I think, probably the hardest job of anybody today, because she has been asked to sum up what we have heard from the many speakers today. It's Annabel Brown from the Centre for Policy Development, and she's going to help us work out where do we go from here to really focus our attention. Annabelle's the Program Director at the Centre for Policy Development, and she oversees their Resilient People and Places program. She's an experienced advisor and facilitator with over 20 years of experience supporting effective social and economic development in Australia and in the Asian Pacific. And she's got particular expertise in leading research and evaluation projects focused on understanding policy, influence, advocacy, leadership development, governance, accountability, and empowerment. She also says that she's passionate about generating knowledge through collaborative processes and using this to improve policy and practice. I think you will agree with me that there would be few other people that with just that same set of criteria that will make it absolutely perfect to be presenting to us in the final session today. Over to you, Annabelle.
Thanks so much, Margaret. Wow, if I wasn't feeling the pressure before, it's certainly on me now. No, it's such a pleasure to be here, and I'm humbled to have been asked to give some closing reflections. I'll absolutely try to do my best to do justice to all of the thoughtful, insightful contributions that I've heard throughout the day. Just to start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I'm on today. I'm coming to you from close to the Birrarung or the Yarra River in Melbourne. I'm on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, which I acknowledge was never ceded. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past and present, and also to any First Nations people listening in today. Well, I'm going to start by zooming out and give some thoughts about the context that we find ourselves in and what is shaping our lives now. I'll then reflect on what I've heard we've collectively learnt about getting settlement right, and particularly regional settlement. And I'll finish with some ideas about the opportunities in front of us. So what's our context? Wow, that's pretty tough to sum up, isn't it? The last 2 years have brought huge disruption to our lives, our societies, our economies. The COVID pandemic has been seismic in itself, but for many communities it's come on top of and alongside ongoing crises related to natural disasters, a changing climate, civil and political unrest. In Australia, of course, how could we forget many of our communities were only just starting to recover from the black summer of 2019 when COVID hit. So this period of turmoil and the health and economic shocks have highlighted, unfortunately, the vulnerabilities in society, as well as the inequality between countries and within them. In Australia, we saw clearly how precarious the position of people on temporary visas was, how insecure casualised employment made it so much harder to keep yourself and your family healthy and safe over the last 2 years. Also, depending on where they live or the industry that they depend on, Australians have had a very diverse range of experiences. Here in Melbourne, we've had the dubious honour of being the most locked down people in the world at 25 days and counting, I might add, while the majority of people living in Perth, which is my home city, have endured less than 20 days. Businesses and their employees in warehousing and distribution have never been busier, while their friends and family in tourism are struggling to stay afloat. In Queensland, for example, employment for tourism and travel advisors fell by 65% in the regions of Mackay, Isaac and Whitsunday. That's just one example of the sort of patchiness of the impact. Of course, COVID-19 has stemmed the flow of newcomers to Australia. We're forecast to experience a net outflow of migration in 2020-21, the first time since the end of World War II. our humanitarian visa program was halted in March 2020, and although visas have been granted since then, physical resettlement's been almost impossible for people. Although net overseas migration could take 4 years to return to pre-pandemic levels, there has been a net increase in migration into Australia's regional areas since March 2020, though, interestingly. So driven by an increasing number of people leaving capital cities and regional people staying in place, obviously knowing that they're onto a good thing. Although it's worth noting, though, that according to the Regional Australia Institute analysis, in March 2021, there were over 66,000 job vacancies across regional Australia, and that's the largest number of vacancies since records began in May 2010. So the movement of people and the possibilities of work opportunities help us turn our collective attention to what resources, infrastructure, support regional communities need to thrive. I don't want to underplay those needs in the excitement of the opportunity. So despite the challenges of the last couple of years, though, we've also been afforded some gifts. So in some ways, despite our different experiences, we've all got to know each other a little bit better. So we've been into each other's living rooms and home offices via Zoom. We've met each other's pets. We've started many of our conversations and meetings asking about each other's mental health, discussing how our children are coping with homeschooling. We've got an even greater appreciation of our health workers, our teachers, our public servants. Communities and neighbourhoods have connected and rallied around each other in the crisis, as we know we do. Like we've heard today, while waiting for new arrivals, the growing regions of welcome initiative in the Murray and Riverina regions of New South Wales and the Community Refugee Sponsorship Australia program have focused over the last 18 months on building connections and understanding between people and families who were already living in the same community before the pandemic. So it's afforded us those opportunities. These greater connections, the diverse understanding, the empathy that we've gained will all stand us in good stead as we recover and build forward. We'll come out of this period stronger and more resilient if we confront and attend to those vulnerabilities and inequalities that we've uncovered and exacerbated during COVID, rather than glossing over them. As Aleem reminded us this morning, social cohesion is a key element of the resilience we need to face the shocks of the future. So what have we learned about settlement? The overarching lesson is that a whole of community, whole of person approach works best for successful settlement, whether that be forever or just a phase of a person's life. So first and foremost, personal agency and informed choice are crucial for people to successful belonging, peace, hope. There are many dimensions to successful settlement, from friendship through to a livelihood, everything in between. And we've definitely seen a greater value and understanding in the social and emotional dimensions of settlement, over and above the 3 E's of employment, education, and English. We've also heard that the right fit can be quite a unique mix of factors, including the natural environment, a feeling of reminiscence of home, a sense of safety, employment opportunities that are attuned to our skills and ambitions. So therefore, there's a great importance in fully engaging our new Australians in a comprehensive pre-settlement decision-making process, as described by Emmanuel Mossoni, and in building person-centred, strengths-based approaches to meeting the needs of new settlers, like we've seen in the 3 E's to Freedom program in northern New South Wales, for instance. Secondly, a welcoming community who are ready and coordinated matters a lot when supporting refugees to settle in and thrive. whether the energy and interest comes from a business or industry, a local council, a community organisation, working together on the welcome makes the magic happen, as we've heard a lot. Working together to assess the strengths and weaknesses in the community, they need to do to be the most welcoming place they can be. Working together on a clearly defined welcoming strategy and plan, working together to implement that plan and give multifaceted support to the people and families coming to settle. There are lots of examples of approaches like these across Australia. One example, for instance, we heard from David Radford today was the effective whole of community approach in Leighton, which engaged the whole of the rural community, not just a few members, and supported humanitarian migrants in a way that did not single them out as a special group, was inclusive of all migrants, local and Indigenous groups in the community. We've also heard great examples of corporate partnerships, including, for instance, in agricultural production in Mount Gambier, and also connections with First Nations communities, including in Armidale and Orange in New South Wales, for instance. And lastly, and Margaret, you just made this point, the importance of the facilitation and brokering of government partners. So personal agency and strong collaborative community approach are supported significantly by infrastructure, services, good governance. So this has been highlighted by the good work of Welcoming Cities. There's a definitive role for local councils, and there are many examples of them taking up that role really successfully, from Toowoomba, Queensland, to Wagga Wagga and Leighton in New South Wales, and to Naracoorte in South Australia. Peter Shergold and his team at Multicultural New South Wales continue to coordinate the state government's response to refugee settlement, including GROW, a place-based approach to resettling refugees in regional New South Wales. And as the Commonwealth Coordinator, General Alison Larkins shared this morning, her team have an important coordinating role, and they're actively brokering, for instance, connections between social enterprises, employers, philanthropists, experts, government counterparts to support refugees who, although keen to work, face the greatest barriers to economic participation. So, building on what we've learnt and the context, I'm thinking that there are three opportunities that I'd like to talk about. Despite our borders being shut, the reasons for people in our region to flee to the safety and security of Australia have only increased over the last 2 years, including the worsening crises in Afghanistan and Myanmar. Climate change and COVID are exacerbating an already precarious situation for many people who are on the move. But COVID hasn't made us more insular. We're still great believers in immigration and multiculturalism. So 71% of people surveyed by the Scanlon Foundation agreed that accepting immigrants from many different countries makes Australia stronger, up from 2019. Also, 84% of people agree that multiculturalism has been good for Australia. And it was really fascinating and heartening to hear the results of research about community attitudes in Armidale since the settlement of the Yazidi refugees there, coming from the University of New England and SSI. At the beginning of this year, even before the Taliban seized power in August, there were already 2.8 million Afghans displaced as refugees and asylum seekers around the world. This includes people with temporary protection in Indonesia and Australia. There are fears that up to 500,000 more could flee before the end of 2021. So I think our first opportunity is to welcome our newest newcomers from Afghanistan. Australia, with our deep and long links to Afghanistan, our historical success in settlement, can respond really generously. We can ensure pathways to safety as many Afghan people as possible, making places available in addition to our humanitarian program, giving people who are already here and in our close neighbours like Indonesia a permanent home, opening more complementary pathways for family reunification, education, employment, community sponsorship, and by supporting Afghanistan's neighbours to continue to assist people fleeing We can also ramp up our leadership in the region by actively pursuing responses to the conflict and displacement crisis in Myanmar and Afghanistan, and steering the Intergovernmental Forum, the Bali process. So as a community, of course, we can build on everything we've learned to do a great job at welcoming and successfully settling our newest Australians. I think our second opportunity is to capitalise on the growing value and prevalence of people and place-focused policy and programming. So our collective experience of crisis during the pandemic has also brought with it a realisation that we can move pretty quickly on policy and programming when we need to. And we've also flexed our collaborative muscles across government, business and civil society. As many of our speakers have reminded us, there is a tremendous diversity among refugees coming to Australia and the places they will eventually settle. And this is now understood more than ever before. Thankfully, we're seeing a newfound appreciation of people and place-focused approaches, whereby services and supports are tailored to and wrapped around people and places according to their needs. We've seen examples of this across the settlement and migration service system, from Alison Larkin's, I think, the community sponsorship model that's being trialled by many groups, like Alison's in the Huon Valley, are also show a place-based and people-centred approach. We've seen similar reorientation of employment services as well across Australia. So there's a significant opportunity to capitalise on this direction in policy and programming, and to work together on the governance, partnership, coordination approaches that really make it sing. Finally, and I think most importantly, the greatest opportunity, the greatest hope lies with the newcomers that come to call Australia home. So the people that bring their talents, their ideas, skills, resilience to our communities and towns, who with the right support can contribute so much. It's been wonderful to hear from Emmanuel, Kwame, Sorgul, Zia and others about the lived experience of being refugees today. And I'm really glad to say that now there are more and more refugee-led organisations and networks to engage. So embracing the ideas of our newcomers about our collective future, involving them centrally in the decisions that impact their lives and giving them the space and support to help shape our society is no doubt the greatest opportunity ahead. Thanks very much.
Annabelle, I knew you could do it, but my goodness, you did it so, so well. So thank you most sincerely from all of us. That was an extraordinary overview of today and absolutely centering us as we move forward. I think that the federal government has a rich and deep body of knowledge on which to draw when pursuing their agenda, their stated agenda as they move forward. They cannot but have it from today. I also feel that the people who are delivering programs and supporting newcomers around this country cannot fail to have been truly inspired by our speakers as well. So I would like to thank everybody all of the people who have presented today. It has been rich, it has been deep, it has been diverse and massively inspiring. But today is not the end. There is more to come. This is the beginning of a process, not its conclusion. Each one of you will be sent a survey, which I encourage you to fill in. This is asking you to identify what were some of the key takeouts from today and the key lessons. What should we be moving forward with? Then there is the roundtable on Friday, in which we hope to weave together the various strands from today and identify tangible outcomes for government, for practitioners, and for academics, so that this is not just something we do and forget, it's something that we use. You'll also be offered future opportunities to hear from researchers and practitioners, so stay tuned. There is more. Before I close, however, it will be remiss of me to pay tribute to the team behind this forum. It was a genuine shared effort, bringing together some really amazing people, and I feel deeply honoured to have been able to play a part. I thank each and every one of you. And then I want to thank all of you who have participated in today. I'm sorry we've gone over, but not by a lot. It's been terrific to see old friends across the country and new friends, hopefully, as well. People who hopefully will stay with us on this journey. Thank you for being part of this special day. I'd now like to close the forum.